Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Phil Shapiro, and today I'm going to introduce to you the healing power model from the point of view of my personal spiritual history. The model emerged from that story, and the story has teaching value in terms of understanding some very important points about pain and healing. I've had a 50-year career as a clinician, teacher, and administrator in community psychiatry. I've had a 50-year experience as a seeker, practitioner, and contributor to the field of mind, body, spirit medicine. As a result of these two experiences and my personal suffering and healing, I've created a self-help, self-healing model that I use myself and teach students, staff, clients, patients, and any interested person. The model is called simply Healing Power. Healing power is a compendium of the wisdom of the ages from the sages, designed specifically for healthcare professionals and their patients. It addresses the inevitable suffering of life that the medical model cannot fix, and it addresses that suffering from a spiritual point of view. Healing power is a collection of 15 methods, 100 healing qualities, a host of wisdom pearls, and a variety of what I call religious traction devices. Those are inspiring universal themes. A collection of the best, in my view. It's a highlight reel of sorts, extracted from great spiritual books, teachers, and masters, and translated into cognitive behavioral, mindfulness, and meditative practices that we can use in healthcare and outside of healthcare. Healing Power is actually my story, my now 80-year story of suffering and transcendence, translated into principles, steps, tools, and exercises that hopefully will be of use to you and the people that you serve. Many painful tests have forced me to dig deep into healing technologies to see what works. The model was forged on the anvil of suffering. A smooth life would never have sufficed to create such a work. Healing power is the answer to the blows wrought by brutal reality, developed after years of study and contemplation. It is a grand scheme about the transformation of suffering into love and wisdom. As I tell you my story and as you learn about the model, you will see elements that are at the same time complex and simple and difficult. But the idea is to make it as simple, elegant, and powerful as possible. And I've attempted to do this, and I think that the entire story and the model can be reduced to a single sentence. This is about the triumph of love over pain. To break that down a little bit right now, I think the entire story of religion is the triumph of love over pain, and we can take that universal theme and apply it to our life, and we can see that actually a great deal of healing has to do with that very sentence, the triumph of love over pain. So we will elaborate on that greatly. The entire healing power model is that. And you'll see that there are 5 distinct layers in the model. There's the story. The story in model form is the 10 steps. The 10 steps are permeated by 10 key healing principles. All of that comes down to a mechanism for healing called the universal healing wheel, or pain method quality, 3 variables. It's actually an exact correspondence to the Buddha's 4 noble truths. And then some exercises that consolidate the whole thing into a patient daily practice. Here's the whole thing on a single page. Healing power aligns perfectly with the mission of healthcare, which is healing and the relief of suffering. And as you can see, if the entire story of religion is the triumph of love over pain, there's the suffering, and there's the healing. So we can take this principle, the triumph of love over pain, and transfer it to healthcare. And if we do that, there are considerable benefits for staff and patients alike. For when we practice the recommended methods, the following happens, and this is profound. There's more healing power. There's ever increasingly skillful pain management, and there is spiritual evolution. Well, number 1 and 2 is the mission of healthcare: expand healing power, manage your pain more skillfully. And then a grand bonus, spiritual evolution, which in this model has 3 components. We're going to feel better. We're going to become better people. And if we keep going deep enough, we'll experience higher states of consciousness. That's a grand bonus. Before I start my story, I want to point out something that's going to be a repeated theme, which is something I call consolidated universal variables. So I'll tell my story. These are the key events that led to the healing power model. And universal themes will emerge called consolidated universal variables. Kind of a boring term, but it's important because it's actually a box. A consolidated universal variable is a box packed with deep pearls that relate to healing and pain management, and that are collections of wisdom and love that have the result of healing and pain management. So the boxes are critical, they're important, and they're dynamic. They interact with each other in powerful and dynamic ways. My story starts in the 7th month of fetal life, and the first 2 consolidated universal variables that have emerged later in life, I refer to at this early stage as the illusion of safety and brutal reality. I'm 7th month in fetal life. My parents decide to go out to dinner just to take a break. They leave my sister, Suzanne, at a neighbor's house. She's 18 months old at the time. This is a good neighbor, a reliable person. If not, my parents would never have trusted her. But she made a terrible mistake by leaving Suzanne on a dining room table and walked away. Suzanne rolled off the table, fell to the floor, and cracked her skull and had some serious brain damage. By the time my parents had returned to pick her up from the babysitter, they found her to be having status epilepticus. She had multiple seizures. They rushed her to the emergency room. They did a spinal tap. It was bloody. From that day on, my sister had cerebral palsy. And from that moment on, my mother had PTSD. So now back to this little 7th-month-old fetus in utero who was experiencing the illusion of safety, the internal milieu of being created by the divine maternal aspect of the universe, omniscient love, all-knowing love, stitching together that sperm and egg into the trillions of cells that make up this exquisite machine that we are, that's miraculous beyond comprehension. The feeling, I'm sure, although of course I don't remember, was one of love and safety, warmth and embrace, like the maternal aspect of the universe, cradling that little baby, creating it, nurturing it, building it, loving it. Tremendous wisdom, tremendous love, tremendous nurturance, a feeling of safety, no pain, no problem, float, ecstasy, joy. And on a dime, that what I now call the illusion of safety, because it's not permanent, can be replaced by brutal reality. And in life at any time, The flight, fright, freeze chemistry of PTSD came infusing into that little baby's body, hitting those neurons and freaking it out. And it's like, what's this? Right. And I didn't even have a chance to get out with that feeling of safety into the planet. It hit me in 7th month of fetal life. It hit my sister at 18 months. It hit my mother in a big way that day and never left her. So just to finish the story of my sister, she grew up as a beautiful person physically and spiritually, never saw her angry for a second, but she had a tough life and she was quite lonely. She wasn't fast enough to keep up with the fast lane kids. So she spent most of her time alone, but was never bitter. Her greatest fear, however, was that she would never get married. At age 26, a strange illness occurred and she demyelinated her optic nerves and became blind on top of that cerebral palsy. She went to Braille school to learn how to read with her dystonic muscles in her hands, a difficult task. But she learned, and while she was there, she met Gene Anderson, the love of her life. She fell passionately in love with her, and he with him, and he with her. Gene was completely blind, but otherwise uh, had no disability. He had the highest score, or the second highest score in the Chicago teachers exam, but he couldn't get a job. They wouldn't hire him because he was blind, and there were no laws to protect the disabled at that time. So he remained unemployed. My parents wanted Suzanne and Jean to get started, and my father would try to help him find a job. So they planned to get married and live in my parents' house. That happened. There was a wedding on a Friday, small, humble, and a very humble honeymoon, with me driving them to a local motel on a Friday. And then on Sunday afternoon, I went to pick them up. My sister was ill on that day. And in 6 months, she had demyelinated her entire nervous system, a illness that no neurologist could figure out because it didn't fit any pattern, but it took her life. She died at age 28. So brutal reality, death, pain and suffering, and the unknown. Everybody gets a turn, perhaps not as early as the 7th month of fetal life or at 18 months, as with Suzanne, but everybody will eventually have to deal with that dynamic. We'll be talking a lot more about that throughout the modules. I was born on July 14th, 1943, in case you want to send me a card, and you may forget. So Bastille Day is the same day, July 14th, and that's the French birthday. I was born to a middle-class conservative Judaism family. Conservative doesn't mean Republican or conservative politics. It means a type of Judaism that had a tremendous stress on family, education, service, humor, great food, the expectation to marry within the faith. It had a tribal aspect in terms of we, they, based on thousands of years of persecution, and a whole lot more. And I liked it. I followed the rules for the first 12 years. I refer to that phase as the Jewish Boy Scout, and the theme being, it feels good to be good. However, there's a committee in our heads, and there are multi-dimensional aspects to our personalities. And and that 12-year-old little boy, one day, a new archetype showed up. His name was Dennis the Menace. And he represents the part of me that likes to try things and test the boundaries and take risks and has a sense of adventure, a glint in his eye, not afraid to break rules. And it's like, well, let's see what happens if you poke at the bear. Try this, do that, check it out, run an experiment, see what happens. So Dennis is in charge. And back then, my Gentile friends, non-Jewish friends, were eating cheeseburgers. And I always envied that. It looked good. And I wanted one. So no one's looking. I'm in downtown Chicago at a athletic club my father was a member of, working out every Saturday morning, watch Oliver and Hardy movies, and then hop on a bus and go home. Took about a half an hour to get home on the bus. Back in the day, Walgreens had lunch counters. So there was a Walgreens right next to this workout club in downtown Chicago. I walk in, I sit down at the lunch counter, and I go, I'm going to get me one of them cheeseburgers. So now, if you know the kosher laws, there's a couple of sins in there. One is the meat isn't kosher. When you eat out, it's not kosher meat. You can't do that. You can't mix milk with meat. So there's the cheese in the burger. I chased it with a shake, more milk, and then the fries could have been made in pig fat. So there are four little sins there, little Jewish sins there. And it's basically, I bit the apple in the Garden of Eden. And in Freud's model, that's the id, the pleasure principle. I threw the cheeseburger down. It was delicious, radically delicious. Like I see why these guys are eating cheeseburgers. That's some good stuff. But then the superego, continuing with Freud, kicks in. Superego represents the higher power and the rules. And in this little boy's guilty conscience, it was, you shouldn't have done that. God is not happy with you, said the little 12-year-old boy's thought. And the punishment will be swift and severe. When you go out onto the curb and wait for the bus, that bus is going to jump off the street onto the curb, run you over, and that'll be the end of the story. Well, it didn't happen. I got onto the bus. I was safe, went to bed that night tucked in, safe and sound. And the thought went, what else can I do? So why I'm telling you this story, the cheeseburger effect is a consolidated universal variable. It is packed with information that is critical to understanding so much about life, because it represents the first step in the complete unraveling of my Jewish belief system. And it represents the first step in the unraveling of anybody's belief system. Move the clock forward to the University of Michigan, age 17 through 21. I'm about 19 years old, let's say, at the time of this chapter that I'm going to talk about right now, in terms of being in pre-med, 45,000 people from all over the world, all the intellectual marbles around the table. One night, Friday night, one of those questions comes up: does God exist? Answer to the question, I don't know. True answer, I don't know. Now, think of a chessboard, and the pawn is a cheeseburger. Mixing metaphors, but you'll see what I mean. The pawn is down. Now, in actual life, the cheeseburger led to, well, I don't think I need this rite or this ritual. I'm not sure I got to follow this. Why do I follow that? Well, I don't see why I have to. All the rites and rituals went down, and it got to, does God exist? And the answer was, I don't know. Well, if you use chess as a metaphor, pawn, rook, knight, bishop, you lose one piece at a time. It gets to the centerpiece of the belief system, or the king. In my case, the Jewish faith system, the king goes down, enter existential anxiety. And I felt it as what I now call terror at the abyss. And using that term, I've learned a lot. I see a lot, because it felt to me like God was or, the cosmic force or whatever you want to call it, was holding me over the Grand Canyon by the scruff of the neck and asking me, "How do you feel now?" And the answer was, "I am terrified. Too much space. I feel like I'm going to die." "Sir, ma'am, hello, whatever you are, put me back on land, please. I need the illusion of safety to get through the day." Well, this is a big dynamic in life. We kill each other over terror at the abyss. Belief systems are responsible for death of tribes and nations because people are terrified of losing their story. And if you go near that cheeseburger, near that pond, near that first element of the belief system, you get a huge debate, fight, or even death, because the abyss is dangerous and it can kill you. I'm at age 29. I'm in medical. I finished my medical training, and this is about early retirement. So after 11 years of foreign pre-med, foreign medical school, a year of internship, and 2 years in the United States Public Health Service, at that time, everybody owed 2 years to the military. I did a non-military but uniformed service called United States Public Health Service. So that was around July 1st, 1972. I'm 29 years old. And on that day, I retired. That entity that was created by the 11-year experience was called Dr. Shapiro. And he was supposed to go on for residency training. That was the next step that the average person in medicine would go to. But there was a fly in the ointment for me because at that time, that young man was confused, bewildered, exhausted. He had no idea who he was as a man or as a doctor. The result of a combination of the abyss, which I had just talked about, the terror at the abyss, the existential anxiety. He had his fair share of character defects. And there were a number of holes and limitations of the medical model that were profoundly disconcerting and alienating to him. I referred to this in the book that I wrote called Physician Heal Thyself. I won't go into the details right now, but there was a lot in medicine that worked to alienate and burn me out. So I retired. I walked away from medicine, and I didn't know if I'd ever see another patient. Again, I had enough money saved up to buy 10 months to go on a great exploration and quest with the looking for answers to two big questions. Who is Phil and who is Dr. Shapiro? I label this chapter The Seeker. I'm 29 years old. I'm searching for my soul and the soul of medicine. I couldn't have told you that at the time, but retrospectively, that's what it was. Who is Phil? Is there a soul? Who is Dr. Shapiro, and how does he connect to the story of medicine? So in that 10-month period, I became a spiritual seeker. That Jewish Boy Scout reemerged. But in this phase, he became a voracious reader of spiritual books, and he began to practice meditation and other spiritual disciplines. He became a pot washer. The restaurant people would bring back their guests to see the pot washing doctor. I cleaned up oil spills. I played chess. I went to the movies. I talked to people. I hung out. I just lived. I also went into therapy with Dominic. I had 4 psychotherapists. The first 3, not so much. Dominic was very brilliant. And I would walk into Dominic looked like Pavarotti, the great opera star, round, jolly, handsome, beautiful, beautiful presentation, physically and spiritually and mentally. He's a very bright guy. I walk into his office, I tell him my story. He would say something, and I would walk out without pain. I walk in pain, there'd be no pain at the end of the session. I thought, what did Dominic do? Pain and healing. pain and healing. I started tracking those consolidated universal variables, pain and healing. What did Dominic do? I'd walk in there with my wife, Sharon Whitney. We do a little couples counseling because we got twisted into a pretzel. We couldn't even talk to each other. We couldn't solve a problem. We were helpless. And Dominic would say something and the whole thing would dissolve. And we'd have a light-hearted breakfast. I was fascinated. What did Dominic do? Pain and healing. We walk in pain, we walk out healed of that pain. What did he do? Our sons were conduct disordered adolescents who got in trouble with the street and addiction. My wife was guilty. I was furious. It's not a good combination. Affected our marriage deeply. Went to Al-Anon, kind of boring, didn't work. So I started going to 12-step meetings, AA, opened AA meetings, and I would sit down. My name is Phil. I have addiction in my family. I have my own issues. I would just like to sit here and absorb. They welcomed me. I would walk into those meetings in pain, and I would walk out, the pain would be gone. Fascinated me. What was happening? How does it work? How does that pain get transformed through some kind of healing process where the pain is gone? How does it work? Part of my life at that time was making rounds with a bunch of people that I knew that now we're in the 60s and the 70s. This is a time where old models are getting busted and new models are coming in. And that was just what was happening. This was the counterculture, and there was cultural evolution, cultural revolution going on. And Ken, one day, Ken worked at a bookstore, and I would just take a walk and stop in and see how Ken is doing. So Ken says, I'm going to India to meet a guru, and I'm going to get the knowledge. And I thought, well, that's interesting, if not fascinating. I'll check you out when you get back. About a month later, I visit the bookstore. Ken is there, and he's kind of glowing. And I said, well, how was your trip? And Ken describes a guru called Guru Maharaji, a organization called the Divine Light Mission. And he starts rapping about this guru. This guru is 15 years old. He is perfect. He's the Messiah. He's going to bring 500,000 people a day to the knowledge. He's going to transform the planet. This is the second coming, etc. And I thought, this guy has a flight of ideas, pressured speech, elation, grandiose delusions. This looks like hypomania. Of course, I didn't say it in that language because at that time I wasn't a psychiatrist, but that's what a psychiatrist would say in doing a mental status exam on Ken and his new belief system and his mental status. My mind went, this guy is tripping. He's gone. He's flipped. Ken is nuts. There was a problem, however, because at the same time that he's rapping wildly and ecstatically about this guru and the mission, I'm experiencing a superconscious state, the likes of which I had never experienced before, and the likes of which I had been reading about in these great spiritual books that I had been reading about the last couple of years, which is the peace that surpasses understanding, perfect, pure, and unconditional love, ecstatic joy, bliss, nirvana, God. It doesn't matter what you call it. The experience is quite exquisite. And I'm having one of them. My energy went up to a whole new level. This is a non-drug related experience. And it's like quite stunning. So I thought this is bizarre because Ken is nuts and I'm getting high without a drug. So I was trapped. and I didn't really quite know what to do, but this was a personal experience that was like a point of data in my hunt. And so however nuts it sounded, I couldn't dismiss it. So Ken told me about a meeting the following day that would occur about this guru called satsang, means in the company of truth. So I thought about it and I said, well, I'm going to go. So the next night I go to this meeting. It's just a regular person's house, living room, young woman sitting up in front with a picture of the guru next to her, about 10 to 15 people in the audience. The guru did look really gorgeous. He was Buddhistic in his appearance, kind of round and deeply handsome, and seemingly charismatic energy coming out of the picture. And I'm just going to observe and listen. So the woman opens up her talk, and she's talking about the guru and the knowledge. While she's talking, she completely disappears, only to be replaced by a light, an exquisite, beautiful light that was so intense I could no longer see her body. All I could see was light. And while I'm experiencing this, I was filled with a warm, exquisite, loving, sweet, gentle, soft vibration, the likes of which I had never experienced before. And I'm thinking, wow, what is this? What is happening? Uh, this is spectacular. So that experience, again, not drug related, was profound and lasted only for a few minutes. And then it disappeared and I could see her body again. So reflecting back, that the mission was called the Divine Light Mission. The Bible speaks about God as light. Apparently, some people see the light. When you see pictures of saints, they have halos. I have read about auras. Apparently, there's a layer of reality that is light, and that some people get a chance to see it, whatever the mechanism might be. But at this point, it has shown itself to me for a few minutes. So I'm trapped because, again, the description of the model is weird, but I'm having these superconscious experiences 2 in 2 days. So it's like the left brain goes, this is strange. And the right brain goes, what are you going to do with this experiential database? Well, they had one of the guru's lieutenants going to Boston. They call him a Mahatma, who was going to give them knowledge. Well, I'm in Portland, Maine. That's 2 hours from Boston. So I go down to Boston. I decide to get the knowledge. The knowledge is a series of 4 techniques. I take the techniques home. I go into the closet, literally. I had a meditation a room that was a closet. I go into the closet, I sit down, and I listen to the guru's instructions, which is with these techniques you can discover God. So I did the techniques. I put in a request. Okay, whoever you are, whatever you are, show me. And a third superconscious experience occurred almost immediately. I elevated into a state of clarity and heightened energy that was exquisite beyond description, which the mystical experiences always are. They cannot be described. It's impossible because it's the domain beyond words, and it's gorgeous. Never frightening, always exquisitely gorgeous. So at this point, because I had put in the request and it came immediately on the heels of that request, it freaked me out. And it was kind of like the Holy Ghost, like there's a ghost and it can come in and show itself. So I freaked out. I ran out of the closet. I ran down to the kitchen where Sharon Whitney, my wife, was, and I started ranting about what had just happened. She kind of very calm and good humored said, that's cool. And the situation passed and I moved on. But the next thing that happened was I'm still unemployed, um, still not knowing who I was as a doctor, although some of the material for Who is Phil is starting to consolidate. And I get a call from this guy named Dr. John Horton, who is a member of this Divine Light Mission community, a follower of the Guru. And he said, 30 people from this community are moving into New York City, to New York City, into 3 apartments in the Upper West Side. And they're going to form an intentional community. The intention is meditation, learn how to meditate, reduce our egos, and form an interdisciplinary team of healers from a variety of professions and disciplines. There are 3 Western physicians. If I chose to join, there would be 4, and about 30 other people who are specialists in yoga, meditation, breathwork, affirmations, massage, shiatsu, acupuncture, chiropractors, naturopaths, vegetarianism, juicing, fasting, herbs, and more. Do you want to join us? And that was a story that had some music to it for me. That rang a bell. That was an unarticulated problem that I had with the medical model because it was reductionist and I needed expanded healing power to feel a part of something bigger. And that's what this sounded like. So I joined up. We moved into this spiritual community. I was participating in what was, I'm sure, one of the first holistic clinics in the country, and it was a forerunner of what turned out to be complementary and alternative medicine. It was a big and good experience. However, it did fail. It was an inadequate business model. We were immature. There were many issues, including leadership issues. So the clinic failed, as did my time with the Divine Light Mission, because after about a 4-year experience where there was many wonderful things, including multiple superconscious experiences, this grandiose idea of this guru being a perfect God-realized master who was the Messiah and was going to bring the whole planet to him, nonsense. He wasn't even fully God-realized. He had issues, and the whole thing unraveled, and we all bailed. But it was a 4-year experience, and I learned a lot about meditation, yoga, Hinduism, spirituality, and so forth. But when the clinic failed, and as this system was dissolving, I needed to get a job because we're in New York, and a person has to make a living. So I poked around and I found a job in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is an inner city neighborhood in Brooklyn, mostly African American. And it was in methadone maintenance at St. Mary's Hospital, part of the New York City methadone maintenance treatment program. This was cross-cultural, people of color. And I'm a GP and I'm practicing addiction medicine, and it was very powerful as a white man, young white man from the suburbs, relatively protected, privileged, and I'm working the street in a street program, meeting phenomenal people who had gotten hooked to heroin and had come in from the cold to get the methadone and try to recover, and I'm their doctor. So I learned a tremendous amount. But it wasn't gonna be a career line, but it did hold me for about a year. And about a year into it, 3 or 4 of my friends from the community sat me down, and it was like an intervention. And they said to me, "You're a psychiatrist." And I said, "Oh no, no, that's impossible. I had a terrible experience in psychiatry in medical school." And I proceed to tell them my sorry and sad psychiatry story. And it goes something like this. I'm internist. I'm a junior in medical school, and we're going through all these rotations. At that time, I thought I was going to be an internist, and I needed to in psychiatry, I needed to learn about the psychology of morbidity and mortality because my patients are going to have illnesses that won't get better. It'll be chronic or progressive and possibly even lead to death. So I need to learn about the psychology of morbidity and mortality. I need to understand how to position myself in their story of suffering and coping. I'm 25. I don't know anything. I need mentoring and wisdom. Instead, they gave me a patient with obsessive compulsive disorder and a psychoanalytic supervisor who wasn't attentive and missed his sessions with me. So it left me in the room with this person. I didn't know what I was doing, and it made me anxious and angry. And I'm immature, so I acted out my anger by flunking the test. And I said, I'll show them. I'm going to flunk this. So the dean is looking over my record, and he sees that I'm an honor student, and I'm flunking psychiatry, and he's confused. So he calls me in, asks me what's going on. And I tell him my story, what I just told you. And he was experiencing me as a little ahead of his time, I should think, because I was being an assertive student designing my own curriculum. Well, that was unheard of back in the day. So he just leaned over the desk and peered at me through his beady medical oligarchical eyes and said in a very kind and firm way, son, do you want to be a doctor? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, pass the test. And I said, yes, sir. And I studied the book and I passed the test, but that soured me on psychiatry, I thought, forever. But these friends of mine were doing an intervention. They listened respectfully, but they pierced through the veil of that story and hit a target in me at some level. And they just said, you are a psychiatrist. And I thought, what are they talking about? What do they see? I have no clue what this means. But it planted a seed. And in New York City, they have everything in spades. I mean, everything is there, and there are multiple layers of everything. It's just dynamic as you can imagine and beyond. An example of that is I noticed at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx, there were 5 residency training programs in psychiatry alone, 5 separate tracks. You could choose any one of 5 different programs at Albert Einstein alone. And I was stunned by that. Like, wow, look at that. And so I looked at the brochures, and one of them had some interesting music to it. It had a couple of come-ons about designing your own program, the Free School of Psychiatry. We are studying systems theory and a bunch of other stuff that caught my attention. So I went for an interview, and I'm now about 31 years old, and this chapter is called Community Psychiatry. And it's like, let's meet Dr. Ed Hornick. So this is a life-changing event. Ed Hornick walks into the interview. I see a man with a cape, an earring, platform shoes, gray hair coming out of every angle of his head, just like Albert Einstein. And he's intimidating and charismatic and bright. He was a surgeon who went into psychiatry, I think, to get the cure because he had issues and he was a little corrupt, a little sociopathic, but otherwise a very brilliant, charismatic, and fun guy to be around. And he starts toying with me. He's the cat, I'm the mouse. And he says to me, I see you've had a confused and chaotic life. How do you explain this? And I said, well, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, and we go through a lot of changes. And when you go through a lot of changes, you learn a lot of things. And he said, well, that's sensible. And, we have an open slot here, and I think you're a good candidate for it. So let me tell you who we are. He said in the straight programs, they're doing psychoanalysis and the medical model. And I want you to learn that. And I want you to learn everything else. Everything else means that there are multiple layers of story out there. And it has to do with racism, poverty, and all of the other isms and all of the other environmental influences that people are experiencing. And I want you to take off your stethoscope and your white coat. And I want you to have elephant ears. I want you to have ears as big as elephants. And I want you to put your ear to the ground and listen from a point of view of openness to pick up these layers. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the knowledge of systems theory and family systems and understanding organizations and groups and culture and spirituality and religion. And we're going to use that knowledge and the medical knowledge and the molecules and the physical science. And we're going to play those cards as teammates with other disciplines in an egalitarian way, in rhythm and in sync with the universe and its clock. And I thought, that is amazing. That was boom and bingo. It hit me right in the chest, at the center of my brain and heart, and it became the first day of the rest of my professional life. I felt like a made man. He sang the song that was exactly what was missing in my life. This was indeed the free school of psychiatry. I did design my own curricula, and I continued with my passionate study of healing models. So in this zone, in the psychological psychiatric zone, there was Gestalt, transactional analysis, Freud, Jung, logotherapy, existential therapy, systems theory, family therapy, group therapy, milieu therapy, therapeutic community, psychodrama, and a whole lot more. So I'm practicing community psychiatry. And I got a job. I'm moving the clock now to age 37, and I got a job working at Harlem Hospital in Harlem. The program was called Harlem Rehabilitation, and it's a fully funded psychiatric rehabilitation program fashioned after the famous Fountain House. This was a cross-cultural experience with mostly African-American staff and patients. And at the time, people were doing a lot of angel dust. That drug confused me. It was so dangerous, and I couldn't understand why people would do it. So I formed a group, and it was a process group. I didn't have answers. I had questions. I wanted to get a conversation going and see if there was anything I could do to understand and help. Well, another agency heard that I was doing a group on dual diagnosis, which is major mental illness and substance use, and they thought that I knew what I was doing, and issued an invitation to me to come and give them a talk. I accepted, but didn't have a model to tell them. And so I look back with great wonderment about how I accepted such an invitation and can only attribute it to the male ego, which I think of as akin to a peacock's tail. So you're 2.5 years old, you're just a little tiny kid, and your aunts come over on a Sunday afternoon and they think you're adorable and they just uh, express that love. Oh, aren't you something? You're so cute, blah, blah, blah. And that feeling manifests itself through this male ego. When you grow up as a man and you have a male ego, you have that same desire. You want to be recognized and admired. And it's like a peacock's tail. It's like, sure, I'll show you my feathers. Come give us a talk. Sure, I'll show you my feathers. Well, I turned around and I saw, whoa, there's no feathers there. So I was in trouble, but I didn't get anxious. I was cocky, maybe a little arrogant, too confident. But if not for that, I wouldn't have accepted the invitation and I wouldn't have created the model that emerged. So a few days before the talk, I took out my trusted yellow legal pad and started jot down some notes. And while I'm so I put down pain and healing as the two variables to start with. It's like there's the pain and then there's the healing, right? Big, broad categories. I call them consolidated universal variables. Huge amount of information in each one of those words. And they dance together. How does this pain and healing work? And I had been asking myself that question on the surface of my consciousness for years. How does this work? And then I realized that I noted that in the morning, I would be in meditation, which would have elements of super consciousness in it, and that during the day, I'm in brutal reality, experiencing racism, poverty, mental illness, and addiction, and that the contradiction between these two points is profound. And I thought I shouldn't really stand up in front of people and give a talk unless I could connect the dots. Super consciousness in the morning, brutal reality during the day. Is there a connection? How do you connect the dots? Pain and healing, pain and healing. Now, I had been studying as the spiritual seeker. I had been studying models as the psychiatric student and practitioner. And all the while, something is cooking underneath the surface. And it started, and on this invitation, it consolidated into a model with 6 consolidated universal variables that appeared for the first time. And I could see the dance that occurred between these boxes. And so the model came out called Brutal Reality and the Illusion of Safety, Security, and Immortality. This is when I'm 37 years old, and it had 6 components: people, activities, belief system, self-knowledge, brutal reality, and the illusion of safety, security, and immortality. These boxes are profound, loaded, and dynamic. They do dance with each other. I teach this as a standalone model. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now. It is written up in the books. But the people part is we need support from people who give us love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, courage, strength, and humor. There's healing and pain management there. We need constructive, meaningful activities, school, training, work, hobbies, culture, sports, music, dance, and so forth. Pain and healing is there. We need belief systems, which are secular or spiritual, fixed or open, but regardless, we need positive thought, meaning, and purpose. There's healing and pain management there. And we need self-knowledge, knowledge of our inner being, that which we typically learn in psychotherapy. We learn about the nature of our inner being. We learn the nature of our issues and problems, and we find solutions and strategies from that pain. So there's pain and healing there. And if we can get those 4 boxes cooking in a positive direction, we have a chance to contain, reduce, or shift brutal reality, which is death, pain, and suffering and the unknown, to the illusion of safety, security, and immortality, which means that I feel safe, even though I'm not, because I've got the 4 boxes of people, activities, belief system, self-knowledge cooking in a positive way. I get the illusion of safety. And I can cover brutal reality until it takes over, and then I can figure out a way to manage it with courage and strength. So that was basically the model I presented that day, and people came up to me afterwards and they said, that was good, and you need to publish that. So I said, wow, I made a model, and the people like it. Well, that set me up to teach that model for the next 15 years or so. So move the clock now to age 50, and this is called the birth of healing power. So the brutal reality model was the platform for the birth of the healing model, which is the 5 books that I've written and that I now teach. So how did that happen? Well, I used that brutal reality model as my self-help model for decades, and it was working. I was slowly improving. My anger was reduced to 0 for really years, and I started to feel better. I was becoming a better person. However, in a period of 10 days, I had 3 discrete bouts of anger that I hadn't seen for years. These were not physical fights, but one of them was close to physical, and it scared me. I'm in the airport at Portland Airport, coming home from some trip, and some guy, I refer to him as a coked up executive. He felt very important. And he just ran over me on the way to get his suitcase. And I was offended. And I said to him, I went up to him and I go, excuse me. And he goes, I don't owe you anything. And I said, yeah, you do. You owe me an apology. And I need you to take responsibility for what you did. And he goes, I don't owe you nothing. And I got bigger, right? And I got into his face and he saw the anger, and he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And I said, okay, good, thank you. And I backed off. But I got unnerved by that, because if he had continued to resist, it could have gotten physical. And then there would be a headline, I imagined, um, homicidal psychiatrist erected at Portland Airport. Wife had to bail him out. He's got to present himself to the board, the licensing board, and so forth. Fear thoughts based on reality. So I had a meeting coming up. I was fascinated with organizational psychiatry, so there's a meeting about that in Wisconsin. So I went to the meeting, and the morning was the classes, and the afternoon and evening was for networking, and I didn't feel like networking. I needed introspection. So I took 3 books with me. One was called Real Magic by Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer was a TV self-appointed guru, author. He was on the big stage teaching self-help. And he was good, smart guy, enjoyable, wise. And this book was called Real Magic, and it was about unconditional love. And I read that and I go, yeah, that's my diagnosis. I don't have enough unconditional love. I'm coming from the Old Testament, and it's like an eye for an eye. And for me, it would be like more like an eye for 3. I mean, you poke me, I'm gonna poke you 3 times. So I had a lot of self-righteous anger based on ego. So I need to love more. I got that from that book. And the second book was called The Tao of Healing by a guy dying from ALS. It was metaphoric, allegorical, lyrical, and gorgeous. Very healing, very soothing. That helped me. And then a third little tiny pocketbook called How You Talk to God, Paramahansa Yogananda. And I opened that one up, and it was like clarity, the likes of which I hadn't seen too much of. And he goes, I talk to God and I get a response. I'm betting that you talk to God and don't get a response. And I think I know why you don't get a response, and I think I know why I do. And he goes on to explain. And I thought, wow, that's a spectacular clarity. Filed it away. I go home feeling a little better. And one night, a few days later, my wife and I, Sharon Whitney, are having a vegetarian meal at the Rose Cafe on 23rd Street in Northwest Portland, which was connected to the New Renaissance bookstore, physically connected. So we're walking on the porch, and I look at the window of the New Renaissance bookstore, and it's like a whole bunch of books by Yogananda. And I thought, wow, look at all those books Yogananda wrote. I didn't know he had such a library. I had read his autobiography of a yogi back in the early 70s, amidst the 100 or so spiritual books that I read in my search, and it was good, but it didn't stand out. It wasn't anything seemingly different from anybody else, so I just moved on. But anyway, I'm a seeker, and I'm going to take a look at these books when I get a chance. So 3 days later, I go back to the bookstore. I find his shelf, and there is 6, 8, 10, 12 books by Yogananda. I can't remember how many, but I opened them up. I read a sentence or a paragraph, and it was stunning in terms of the clarity and the vibration that was hopping off those words. Clarity like the likes of which I had never seen before. It's like this guy knows something, and it was my time to get it. And so I took all of the books that I could carry to the counter, and there's a young woman behind the counter who's going to take my credit card, and I'm going to pay for this. But I felt a little embarrassed because I was buying so many. Felt like a spiritual glutton. So it's a hot day in August, and I said to her, it rains a lot in Portland in the winter, and one has to have his books. And she said to me, sir, you do not have to apologize. Hand me the credit card back. I take the books. And from that day on, Yogananda had me at hello. I've been mesmerized by his teachings ever since. We can refer to that as Eastern mysticism. In any case, the centerpiece of his thought is unconditional love. And as you know, that is a tough taskmaster. This is a full-time job and more. It basically is impossible, but it's enjoyable to set the intent and do the practices. So that's who I am, and that's what I do, and it works. Now, this next bullet point is called the scientific method in metaphysics. And basically, Yogananda's teaching is don't believe me, don't follow me. Take these theories and prove it to yourself through direct personal experience. And I just love that because it's so respectful. And it's not about conversion and proselytizing. It's about floating a theory and having people evaluate it for themselves with full analysis and logic. But in this case, the science of it is trusting your own consciousness. So the body becomes the temple. And inside of that temple is your consciousness, energy, thought, feeling, desire, decision, and action. And you float a theory and practice the method and see if the theory comes in as lawful and scientific in terms of you got the answer by experiential data. And if nothing happens or it makes you worse or, has side effects, so be it, right? You discard it and move on. So I practice and teach the scientific method in metaphysics. But there's also the scientific method in Western science. And these two methods work hand in glove. At age 60, I'm practicing the models that I'd learned so far. And I got the brutal reality model had belief systems in it. And I got a flyer from Harvard. The leader is called Dr. Herbert Benson. He's an internist, and he's teaching spirituality and healing in medicine. And he's inviting physicians and healthcare professionals to attend a conference in Boston for 23 continuing medical education credits. And I thought, well, I got that covered. I wrote about belief systems years ago. I teach it. I experience it. I can go to the meeting. I can, kind of float or get some Z's, get the 23 CMEs and have an enjoyable experience. Not so. I go to the conference, and this conference changed my life, and it changed my professional life. So day one, this is about the scientific method in Western science. He brings out the epidemiologist who had massive, but certainly ample scientific data that people with an active faith system have better outcomes across the board: medicine, surgery, mental health, and addiction. Now, I know that word faith system is loaded, and I actually think it's belief system with positive qualities, and that the qualities are the healers: patience, kindness, compassion, love, understanding, courage, strength, humor. I think that's what goes into the cells and does the healing, and I don't think the cells care or know about whether or not you have God. I think they care about the qualities. But the evidence was through faith systems, and that's the purpose of this slide and the purpose of this conference, is that there's something in religion that has healing power and pain management to it. Well, I knew that intuitively from my own experience, and so I uh, I wasn't surprised by that at all. But it was nice to see that it had become a science. But day two blew me away because Dr. Benson brings out a rabbi, a priest, a Hispanic Pentecostal, a Florence Nightingale Hindu mystic, a Muslim professor and teacher, and a former secretary of the Dalai Lama, Buddhist, double PhD student from UCLA studying the Bardos, which is transition consciousness from life to death. And he asked these religious leaders to discuss the essential healing principles of their respective faith traditions. Now that was spectacular because each one of those persons was describing the healing that occurs within their faith system, and that this is now evidence-based. And I realized that my personal experience of going through all this and creating the brutal reality model was actually a molecule in a greater parallel evolutionary chemistry set. I was part of something much bigger. And that gave a great feeling of gratification and comfort that I was connected to something that was now science. And what was deeply personal to me in terms of the pain and healing that had occurred in my story was now an example of mind, body, spirit medicine and evidence-based Western science. And so we can have direct personal experience with the scientific method of metaphysics, and we can have epidemiological data in the Western model, and they come together. Day three was how to apply this knowledge to healthcare. Well, this was very exciting. I came back from Boston to Portland, where I was working at Cascadia Behavioral Health. Again, I'm about age 60 at this time. And as you know, community mental health and public mental health has ups and downs. Well, Cascadia was in one of the worst downs I'd ever seen at this time. There was 150 patients to one case manager ratio, 200 patients with no case manager assigned in a float pool. And so services were reduced to crisis intervention, counseling, medication, and case management at the desk only. There was no outreach, no groups. The wagons were circled. We could only do so much, but it was a storm. That lasted for quite some time, but then eventually resources arrived as the executives realized that this was malpractice if it wasn't fixed. So they sent some reinforcers, some troops arrived. We got some new staff, and we could reinstitute groups. And so somebody had the idea of doing a survey, asked the clients, patients, what kind of groups would you like? And then we listed about 15 options. But since I had just returned from this conference in mind body medicine, we added spirituality and healing to the list. And lo and behold, it came back number one choice. I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? It seems like people do want to learn about symptom management and medications and, you know, problem solving and conflict resolution and all that regular stuff. But they also wanted to deal with the big questions of life. Why am I here? Who am I? What is the purpose of existence? Can we understand the nature of the universe? Who are we supposed to be in the story? If there is a God of love, why is there so much suffering and evil? And so forth. So the clinic head and the people in the clinic knew that I'm the meditating doctor, or the quote spiritual doctor. And how did they know that? Well, on Tuesday night after work, they would go drinking, and they would say, Doc, you want to go drinking? And I would say, not tonight, because on Tuesday night, I meditate. Would you like to meditate? And they go, not tonight, I'm going to go drinking. So I'm known as the meditating doctor. And the clinic director asked me if I would do the group. And I said, absolutely, 100% would love to do the group. Loved the groups, was fairly good at it. And so why not a group on spirituality and healing? So I went to my considerable spiritual library, plucked out some books, and I sought what are the universals that we can do at work. And I plucked out principles, methods, and qualities, created a manual. The people loved it. The clients loved it. They said they never felt so respected because we were dealing with the human condition. We weren't diagnosing and treating. We didn't label anybody with an illness or needing this therapy. This is about the human condition. Everybody has a heart, a soul, and a psyche. We are all equal in the struggle, whether you're the doctor, the patient, the CEO, or housekeeping. Those are roles, but in the spiritual world, everybody is 100% absolutely equal, and we're all struggling with these universal dynamics. So people loved it, gave a lot of positive feedback, and that stimulated me to think about this from the possibility of taking it to a larger audience. So I entered the zone of intellectual obsession in a good way, the magnificent obsession, how to bring spiritual healing to medical practice without getting into trouble. Can we move from biopsychosocial to biopsychosocial spiritual? How do we fit all of this into a medical program, into a clinic, into a hospital? People are deeply offended by this if it's approached in the wrong way. We can get into arguments and destructive debate. We're not supposed to talk about these things at work. Well, if we could create a language that would be safe. And I'm just going to pause for a second and clear my throat. We have to create a language that's safe and non-toxic. We have to figure out an attitude of discussion without debate. We have to make sure people stay in their own lane and not try to do any conversion. So we designed some, or I designed some rules and a language system that would allow us to have educational and entertaining discussions. And I wrote up my first draft, and I needed to have an editor. Turns out Sharon Whitney, my wife, is a professional writer. She writes books and plays, and she's very good. So I said to her, Sharon, would you do me the honor of editing my first draft? And she said, absolutely not. And I go, well, why not? And she said, do you remember when we lived in New York City and we tried to write a book together, and you ended up in Brooklyn and I stayed in Manhattan for 18 months? And I said, yeah, I remember. But there were other issues, and I'm more mature now. I've been practicing yoga and meditation for decades, and I can take your feedback without fire or fury. And I'm even-minded under all conditions. And she said, you're delusional. And we laughed. I said, yeah, of course, I'm not even-minded under all conditions, but I can take your feedback. So she reluctantly and with some degree of anxiety said, okay, I'll take a look. A couple of days later, she came down from her loft and she goes, this is not good. And I've edited 10 pages for you, but that's all I'm going to do. I just want to show you what it looks like when it's straightened out. But I'm going to refer you to Bill Johnson. I said, okay. Now, who is Bill Johnson? So Bill Johnson is a writer's coach. He has a model called Story is Promise, and he teaches writers how to write. So Sharon knew him through theater, her world, and I knew him through meditation because he's in my meditation group. So he was like the perfect person to help me. And I called him up and I said, Bill, I got a first draft of a book called Healing Power, and I'd like you to review it. And he said, sure. I gave him the manuscript. A couple of days later, we have coffee. We're sitting down. He says, I got 2 pieces of advice for you. Number 1, did you know, Phil, that a book has a beginning, a middle, and an end? And I said, no, Bill, I don't think about the hundreds of books that I've read from the point of view of I'm in the beginning, middle, or end. And he said, well, it does. They do. And not only that, every chapter fits in between the one before it and after it. And within the chapter, every paragraph fits in between the one before and after it. And within the paragraph, every sentence fits in between the one before it and after it. And I said, oh, are you telling me that from the first word to the last, there's logic and sequence? And he goes, yes. And I said, solid, good, thank you. And then he said, number 2, you have here the wisdom of the ages. And it's very powerful, profound, dense, and deep. And you can't string your pearls one after another without creating bite-sized pieces so that it's palatable and digestible. Otherwise, it's overwhelming and it'll put people's brain on tilt. I said, okay. Beginning, middle, and end, and bite-sized pieces. And he goes, yes. So I said, thank you very much, Bill. And I took those 2 prisms home and I wore them as glasses. And Sharon Whitney goes on the road, which she did quite a bit for her work. And if I don't turn on the television, I make a model. So I put on the prisms of beginning, middle, and end in bite-sized pieces and reviewed that manuscript and rearranged it, blew it up and rearranged it into a crystallized model, which had 10 steps, beginning, middle, and end in bite-sized pieces, created 10 steps. So the first book was called Healing Power, 10 Steps to Pain Management and Spiritual Evolution. There are now a total of 5 books. It was a 17-year writing project. I've taught the model Healing Power for the next 20 years. And then I met Lily, who is also a passionate student of models, and she's quite brilliant. And we want to get into a conversation about healing power on this podcast and bring this teaching to interested persons. Now, the podcast will have 2 layers to it: healthcare and beyond healthcare. In the healthcare domain, we will teach the Healing Power books and the Healing Power model. This is a manifestation of mind, body, spirit medicine, and it's also referred to as transpersonal psychiatry and transpersonal psychology. For those who are interested in beyond healthcare, we will discuss the masters: Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Rumi, the Baal Shem Tov, Yogananda, and others. In terms of healing power, those are referred to as traction devices for the universal healing wheel. And we can touch lightly on what they say, but it has to be in the context of mind, body, spirit medicine, because if you go too deep and too far in a healthcare communities, there'll be many people who get offended. We don't need that. We don't want that. There's plenty of universals for pain and healing within the domain of mind, body, spirit medicine. But for those who are interested in the expanded domain, where the masters have a great deal to do with your personal healing, we'd like to elaborate on that as well. And we will do that, because why wouldn't we? For those who do have that opened domain, there's even more pain management and healing. So that's my story. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'm going to sign off now I'm going to put this video on my website. So for those of you who may be interested, you can find out about the podcast by searching for Healing Power on Spotify. But I did want to post this for the website so that people can hear my story, and then they could look at the other videos for the story in model form. Thank you so much for your attention.